Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV. HFO-TV is co-sponsored by J.R. Johnson LLC, specialists in multifamily restoration and repair work. Gantry Incorporated, the nation's largest independent mortgage banking firm. Butler Exchange Group, offering 1031 tax-free exchange services. And Forensic Building Consultants, experts in the diagnosis, repair, and preservation of multifamily assets.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. Today we have John Horvick, Senior Vice President at DHM Research. They are a research company that does a lot of public opinion polls and things like that, and which we've all seen in the news a lot. So thank you again for coming back. We've had you before, but love to get kind of an update. Maybe kind of shine some light on some of the stuff you've been up to lately in terms of surveying people and what their thoughts are.
Sure. Well, it's election season, so people are very interested on the primaries that come up in May, and then, of course, general behind. And 2022 is an exciting year because, at least statewide, it's governor's race, first open governor's race in a long, long time, new congressional district.
Right.
So it's a real opportunity for change at the state level. And at the local levels, there's just a lot of disappointment and frustration that elected officials and policymakers, advocates are trying to navigate.
And are you sensing that when you're doing these surveys, and maybe shine some light on how you guys doing, but then talk about what you're finding and maybe the level of frustration, because you hear different articles here and there, but you're kind of on the front line of this.
So we do different types of research, survey research, polling, and of course what you see in the news. I do a lot of qualitative research too, so I spend a lot of my time at the table, or nowadays with Zoom on the screen, talking to people in in-depth conversations about what's happening in their community.
Okay.
From a polling perspective, one of the classic questions that pollsters ask, are things heading in the right direction, or are they off on the wrong track? Well, the the right direction number in Portland right now is about 10%.
Have you ever seen it that low?
I've never seen anything that low. And DHM's been in business for 40 plus years.
10%?
10%.
Wow.
So the regional level is about 20%. You know, these are just times where we can talk about the reasons why, but the mood of the electorate is as negative as we have ever measured it.
And in the history, like you said, you guys have been doing this for 40 years. How does that manifest itself in the election? Is it just a full-on, down with everything? I mean, what do you guys in your experience see when you have? I mean, we haven't seen a number of 10%, but what it mean?
When the electorate is this negative, things that we would normally expect to see, a tough time for incumbents in re-election. So then a good time for the out party to have an opportunity. And then things like ballot measures, local funding measures, more likely to struggle. Now, those don't get on the ballot by chance, right? So it could be that elected officials and advocates maybe are less willing to put things on the ballot now, too, if they don't think they'll be successful. But yeah, we should expect voters to be more willing to say no
on things that typically would go through.
And more willing to say, I want new leadership.
And do you know, and I've read some articles about some states that are putting some things on the ballot measure kind of to address the feeling of, about homelessness. Do you think there's enough of that here where you may see some things where they're trying to force legislation to make elected officials in cities do, whatever the policy or change the policy?
It's possible that's going to happen. There's nothing that I'm aware of. I'm missing something that's coming up in May. So I would look towards November for that sort of potential for that. That's a real likelihood, I would think, yeah.
And then in terms of, you said it's a little better outside of the city. Do they give reason? I mean, I think we know, but what are the reasons for this feeling of?
Well, the reasons that are driving sentiment down, there's a trifecta. It is homelessness, number one, clear, has been for a number of years. It's becoming more intense. That's number one. Number two is rising concerns about crime. And number three is rising concerns about cost of living.
Okay.
And some of that's national inflation and some of it's specific to housing. But when we think of homelessness and crime, those tend to be more intensely felt in the city proper. Now, they're in other parts of the community and other parts of the state as well, but I think that's what's driving some of those sentiments there. Okay. Cost of living concerns are pretty widespread.
And with a number like 10% or 90%, so it's going to be across all social economic. This is not
a
suburban.
It's not a Democrat or Republican, suburban versus urban. These sorts of sentiments are widely felt. There is some difference of intensity, but you can't get to that number unless pretty much everybody's upset.
And as we talked about off camera here, you guys have not seen a number like that since, ever.
Ever. My digital archive goes back to 1993, and nothing compares to the time we're in now. And we were talking before, like, trying to find an analogous moment, and the one that I came up with is probably the late 1970s when inflation is high, Jimmy Carter, that Reagan era. But would be my guess that's when we sort of would have had a moment where people have felt this upset about things.
And what typically I know we're in the news, but at 30%, 40%, is that like, hey, something's not right? But we've so far beyond where we've seen before.
Yeah, so historically, again, if I go through our archives, there's other metrics, but this is a good one. The right direction number in Portland, for example, used to typically be in the 60s and 70s%.
Okay.
And then when you get to about 2005-ish, you start to see into, high 50s, low 60s. But then 2-3 years ago, it was in the mid 40s. And then at 2021. Now, there's lots of reasons in 2021, right? We have a pandemic, we had social justice protests for 100 days, we have cost of living, we have all sorts of things. But that's where it really fell off the cliff, is in 2021.
So outside of the city, what are some of the other topics that are, in terms of when you guys are surveying, maybe driving that, or, what are the people saying that are optimistic? What's their look on, on the city and the state?
Boy, it's hard to find people who are optimistic, right? But it's the same issue set is pretty consistent around the state. The intensity is different, if you are, not to partisan cheerleader at all, but if Oregon's been a Democratic state for 20 to 40 years, depending on sort of where you want to put the timeline on.
Right.
So if you're someone's looking for change, like, this could be a moment where that change is possible, and for a lot of voters out there, that might feel real exciting.
Right, right, and even on the city side, which again, it's not, where they're not affiliated with a party, but on city council, we have 2 chairs up for a vote, and so. And maybe even the city, there's more momentum now to change the city charter.
Like, that would be another sort of thing to think about. Portland has changed its form of government 7-8 times, I forget the number.
Right.
And if that's something that you were looking forward to, like, this would be a moment where I think voters would be more willing to say yes to that sort of change.
And typically, I know it's always economic and jobs is usually the big drive. Is that now kind of falling? Is overriding everything?
So it's interesting. So when we think about the economy broadly, you can find different sort of elements that people might, feel intensely about. In the past, it was always jobs. Right? But it's not jobs right now. So jobs is actually pretty far down the list of voter concerns right now. What is a high concern for them now is cost of living. And that is new. The other thing that's changed really in the last 6 to 9 months is, or really if you look at the pandemic, if we ask people if they're worried about their personal finances, young voters, young Oregonians were much more worried than those who are 65 plus. Now it's changed. Voters who are 65 plus are as worried or even more worried than younger voters are. I think what's happening there is that young voters, young Oregonians, the jobs are plentiful. Wages have been on the rise. So that's good for them. If you're an older person or older voter on a fixed income, inflation really takes a bite out of your budget quickly. And I think that that's what we're seeing. We think about elections coming up. As May elections are only 2 months away, voters who are 65 plus are the most likely to show up at the ballot. So that could be a particularly acute concern to the voters for that group of voters. Yeah.
But as you said, the pessimism is not age based. It's across.
It's across the board.
Okay. There may be other triggers for each kind of age group of what that is, but it's across the board regardless. Interesting. So coming into election year, so what other things do you guys do from a research standpoint? Is it other polls? Is it what do you do to try to quantify this or try to give people direction as to how to, I can tell them how to address it, but give them the information to work on that?
So we work for, all sorts of clients, public sector, private sector, advocates. Right. We tend to work on issues we do work on issues that are public policy oriented. Okay. That's our focus. And we're talking about politics a little bit right now because that's what's interesting in an election season. A lot of the work that we do is, long-term policy concerns that aren't happening today. And so that could be about, public health issues that are 3, 4, 5 years down the line, or infrastructure issues that take a decade to sort of address. And then we do, and my favorite thing, to be honest, is our qualitative research. So as much as we can quantify how people feel, positively or negative about something, talking to someone face to face, seeing those emotions, right? To understand the things that they're thinking about that we're not. So when you do a survey, you got to decide ahead of time. These are the important things that I think I should ask you. When you're doing qualitative research, they can tell you if you're asking the right questions or not.
Right. What are the surprises that you've seen in doing this most recent research?
First of all, there's an assumption that, and we are, if you look at voting patterns, that people are super polarized, put in their camps. When people get together to talk about local issues in their community,
that goes away.
It doesn't
go away completely.
But like it is de-emphasized quite a bit. The other thing is, if you're a real political insider, there can be a frustration that voters don't know anything about issues. But when you talk to average citizens who maybe couldn't repeat back stats about the unemployment rate or tax rates, but are they able to reason through difficult public policy challenges with their neighbor? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that can, I've done it enough that I'm not surprised by it, but I think if you don't work in this world, you can assume otherwise.
And in saying that, now that like you said, you've done the quantitative research and talked to people, and still having that level of pessimism, it's kind of like, wow. I mean, we got to a point where, like doing like long-term strategy on infrastructure, there may be no chance even getting that stuff in until you address how people are feeling, about the direction.
That's a real worry. If people disengage from their government, don't have trust in their government or trust in each other, it makes solving all those problems much more difficult.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of, we talked about kind of the surprises. Are you guys do stuff up and down the West Coast, or is it more Oregon Central?
We're Pacific Northwest focused.
Okay.
We do some work nationally, but most of our work is in Pacific Northwest. Oregon, Washington, Alaska are the states that we do most of our work in.
And is this Oregon specific, or are we seeing the same level of disappointment in the other states?
In West Coast states, the issues of homelessness are predominant, right? So, and that's, you see it in Seattle, and you see that in California. The intensity happens to be greater in Oregon. If we look at approval of the governor, right direction numbers, they are lower in Oregon than they are in other places.
Okay. So what do you think is? I mean, so you think we'll see coming in, as you brought up? I mean, I'm not asking to make it political, but this may be a time where maybe incumbents have more problems in terms of getting reelected just because of the sentiment, regardless of what side of the aisle. And like you said, you get local, there's really no aisle. They're kind of all in the middle. So,
right. If we look at the most recent analogous election, I think would be 2010 in Oregon. In 2010, the House of Representatives split Democrat-Republican.
Right.
And Chris Dudley was in about a point and a half of beating Kit Sauber. Now, I think in the gubernatorial election, we have a three-way race. We have a Democrat and Republican, and Betsy Johnson is going to be well-funded and certainly have a lot of voters who are attracted to her candidacy. But if I sort of look at 2010 and think, all right, Republicans came really close in 2010, and I think that the mood is probably even more favorable to them now, you think, well, there's a chance for some different outcomes we've had in a long time in the state.
Which would be interesting. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to kind of shine some light on this. Like I said, we've kind of read about it all, but it's good to hear kind of how that comes about and how that information gets out there. And our hope is that things get better. And maybe,
absolutely,
yes, it's nobody wants to be in a place where we've got 90% of the people upset, but maybe that will give some people energy to get involved and look at making change.
Absolutely. I would expect turnout in this election to be high, and I think it's because people are frustrated and they want to see some changes, and sometimes people need to be spurred into action.
Is there ever, it's your concern when it gets to these numbers that you have a disengagement?
Not.
Is that?
I'm not worried about it at this moment. If we look at where turnout was the lowest in Oregon, it was in the 1992, 1996 era.
Okay.
And I think it was sort of a time when people were feeling things were going pretty okay. The economy was lifting. Okay. There wasn't a lot of political drama on a sort of a personal level, but not on a big policy level. And that's when turnout was lowest. I think when people are frustrated and conflicted about challenging issues, I'd expect turnout to be high.
When things are rosy, they're not going to take a break from the picnic to go to the voter box. But when they're upset, they're more likely to go in there and do that. So interesting. Okay. Well, thank you for coming again. We'll see you next time on HFO-TV. Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.